Hello, my name is Irad Gomez, and for this assignment, we were supposed to identify an aspect of psychology that is sometimes misrepresented in the media. For mine, I have chosen to do the misrepresentation of psychological disorders in movies and film. In order to look at this, we have to first consider what is a psychological disorder. According to the American Psychiatric Association, a psychological disorder or mental disorder is a syndrome characterized by a clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotional regulation, and behavior that reflects a dysfunction in psychological, biological, or developmental processes underlying mental functioning. They're usually associated with significant distress in social, occupational, and other important activities. An important thing to note is that there's this general stigma that physical disorders are seen as more important or critical to deal with than psychological disorders due to them not being able to be seen as publicly. This is a very dangerous stigma because it keeps people from truly being able to deal with the mental and internal struggles that people have to deal with on a day to day that disrupts their quality of life, their functionality, and in turn just makes their life completely impossible to deal with since people don't take it as seriously. The first example of this is in the movie Split, where the main villain of the film, or just antagonist, is a man who suffers from dissociative identity disorder. Dissociative identity disorder is when people exhibit two or more separate personalities or identities, each well defined and distinct from one another. They actually got this pretty accurate in the movie in terms of just the fundamentals of what it is, given that each personality is a separate entity completely of its own with gaps of memory in between, therefore not remembering the in-betweens or the changes in personality. However, the issue comes when he turns out to be violent and has a certain personality called the Beast, which is hyper violent. And this adds to the stigma that people with mental disorders are going to be violent and causing issues, and they're people that you should stay away from. And this, if anything, just hurts the public perception of people with dissociative personality disorder. The second example I have is from The Shining, in which a man moves with his family to a remote hotel where he's going to take care of it for the winter. And in it, he suffers from symptoms of schizophrenia, including hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking. And these pretty much just hurt his day to day activities because they don't let him function. And he suffers from delusions and he can't work on his writing, which is his profession. Once again, in this movie, there's a negative connotation to his disorder because he turned into a rabid killer and wants to kill his family and ends up being the main villain of the movie. Again, this adds to a bad stigma that people with mental disorders are going to be violent and individuals that you do not want to associate with or surround yourself with. Another example is from the movie The Visit and having to do with dementia. This happens when two kids go to see their grandparents, their supposed grandparents, and they've never met them before in person, so they don't know what they're supposed to look like. So, in the plot twist of the movie, it turns out that the people portraying their grandparents are escaped patients from a local hospital suffering from symptoms of many mental health issues, including dementia, which is a general term for loss of memory, language, problem solving, and other thinking abilities. Dementia is not a single disease, it's an overall term to describe a collection of symptoms that one may experience if they're living with a variety. The most common of these being Alzheimer's. But in this movie, once again, they end up becoming violent, and in the nighttime they do weird things that are very obscure and not at all accurate. Once again, this movie is negatively stigmatizing very real psychological disorders and just mental health issues that people have to deal with in real life in some way, shape, or form. In the movie Midsummer, they actually do a pretty good job at showing the protagonist's dealings with post-traumatic stress disorder from the suicide of her sister and the death of her parents, which was also caused by the sister. However, what they don't necessarily do brilliantly is the tackling of bipolar disorder, since her sister, who committed suicide, had bipolar disorder. Although it is true that people with bipolar disorder have a very high rate of suicide attempts with 36%, the nature of taking the parents down with her and such was very exaggerated and very negatively seen as people with bipolar disorder, and affects pretty much how people will perceive them. A person with bipolar disorder often experiences mood states that shift between depression and mania, so like an alternate from one emotional extreme to another. In order to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder, one does have to have a manic episode eventually. And all a manic episode means it's an irregular shift of personality that may last a few days, such as like accelerated speaking, irritable mood, and just it can be different for many people. But yeah. In conclusion, movies and cinema tend to misrepresent mental disorders, obviously for dramatic and cinematic effect. They just exaggerate on the basis of it all in order to get maximum effect and reactions out of their audience. For this sake, of the movie and making sure that they can get their message across. However, this in turn has a negative effect towards the audience and the public due to the fact that they will perceive mental disorders and psychological disorders as shown through film. This creates a negative stigma in general, and it's dangerous since individuals dealing with these in real life are in turn shut out by others due to the negative perception and makes life harder for them. This is something that needs to be checked and made sure to be limited in order to make the lives of those dealing with real psychological disorders easier.